There's something unsettlingly beautiful and quietly tragic about being human. Something we rarely notice because we're too busy surviving inside it. We live on an overwhelmingly gigantic planet, a world with almost absurd variety. Thousands of languages, cultures layered like centuries-old paint, climates that range from frozen silence to deserts that feel like another planet, cities that never sleep, and villages that seem untouched by time. Oceans that stretch farther than our imagination, people whose lives we'll never cross, whose stories we'll never hear, whose worlds will never collide with ours. And despite all this immensity, this endless geography of possibility, we spend most of our lives rotating around one microscopic point on the map. One neighborhood, one cluster of streets, one set of familiar buildings, the same air, the same voices, the same routines that repeat until they feel like an invisible prison made of habit instead of walls. We grow up being shaped by places we never chose. We inherit surnames we didn't select, traditions we didn't design, expectations that were placed on us before we even had a name. The world subtly teaches us that this is normal, that the coordinates that received us are the coordinates that should define us, that the city that raised us should be the city that keeps us, as if the environment in which we appear is automatically the environment in which we must remain. And we comply, not because it fits us, but because we never learned to question it. The same people, the same conversations, the same expectations. Without realizing it, our identities start becoming the product of a small radius of life. But life doesn't breathe properly inside these inherited cages. At some point, a strange and persistent feeling begins to grow inside the chest. Not loud enough to be called a scream, but not soft enough to be ignored forever. It begins as an uneasiness, a restlessness that has no shape or vocabulary yet, but it grows. It moves. It rumbles under the ribs like an unnamed truth, and one day, without warning, it begins to whisper something that terrifies and liberates at the same time. Leave. Not in a childish way, not in a dramatic way, not in a running away from problems way, but in a deeply instinctive, almost ancient way. A way that feels like your bones are remembering something your conscious mind forgot. A way that feels like a quiet rebellion against everything that has kept you small. A way that sounds like a message from the version of you that has been buried under expectations. The whisper becomes a sentence. Go somewhere else. Start again. Disappear from what you know. Rebuild from zero. Escape this version of yourself that no longer feels like you. Where does this desire come from? Why does it show up? Why does it feel so honest, so legitimate, so painfully right, even when nothing particularly dramatic has happened? This is the part people rarely admit. Almost every human being, at least once in their lifetime, feels the urge to vanish, to leave their name behind, to leave their social role behind, to leave their history behind. Not because they are weak or ungrateful, but because something inside them realizes they have outgrown the version of themselves that the world still sees. And this mismatch between who you feel you could be and the cage of who you have been creates a tension that feels unbearable. Sometimes this desire is triggered by clear events, a relationship that collapses and takes half of your identity with it, a string of failures that convinces you that you are stuck in a life too tight for your spirit, a betrayal, a disappointment, a job that drains your soul, the slow erosion of enthusiasm, the kind of sadness that doesn't explode, but eats you quietly, day by day, until even breathing feels like a chore. When life breaks, the environment becomes a witness you no longer want. The city becomes a museum of your past mistakes. Every corner becomes evidence. Every familiar street becomes a reminder of the person you were trying so hard to stop being. But sometimes, and these are the strangest moments, the urge to leave appears even when nothing is particularly wrong, when life is fine, when everything looks stable from the outside, and yet your heart feels like it is rotting in slow motion. There is no tragedy, no drama, no crisis, just a quiet sense that your life has stopped expanding, stopped breathing, stopped carrying any sense of possibility. It's the suffocation of nothing's wrong but nothing's alive. It's the exhaustion of living inside a routine that keeps you functional but kills your curiosity. It's the numbness of being surrounded by familiarity that no longer nurtures you but also doesn't challenge you. In these moments, leaving isn't an escape, it is a resurrection. Psychology calls it many things: environmental fatigue, identity stagnation, spatial renewal impulse, but the underlying truth is simpler. Humans were not designed to stay still. We romanticize stability, but evolution shaped us through movement. Our ancestors crossed continents. They followed seasons. They migrated, wandered, explored. Curiosity kept them alive. Adaptation made them intelligent. Novelty rewired their brains. Sedentary life is the newest, most unnatural experiment in human history. Our bodies adapted to houses, but our souls never truly did. That's the part people underestimate. Leaving is not always about running from something broken. Sometimes it's about running towards something unspoken, a version of yourself you haven't met yet, a life that doesn't exist where you are currently standing, a truth that needs distance to be heard. Humans feel this urge not because we are lost, but because we are alive. And the desire to leave everything behind is often the first sign that the soul is waking up after a long sleep. Almost everyone thinks of escape during their darkest hours, but what many don't admit it is that escape becomes most seductive when pain becomes repetitive. When life stops being a sequence of events and starts feeling like a loop of disappointments, patterns, and memories that tighten around you like a rope. Anyone who has lived through heartbreak, depression, or prolonged stagnation knows this sensation intimately. The environment transforms. The city you used to love begins to turn hostile. The walls of your room start memorizing your sadness. The streets that once felt alive now feel like archives of everything that went wrong. You walk past a place you used to laugh in, and suddenly you feel like a ghost in your own life, watching the past through glass. Every familiar spot becomes a screenshot from a version of you that no longer exists. Every familiar face carries a reminder of the person you were before the collapse. The world becomes an echo chamber of who you used to be, not who you are trying to become. It's not the place that changes, it's the meaning it holds. This is why the desire to escape doesn't feel like fantasy. It feels like survival. It isn't a wish to vanish from the world, it's a wish to vanish from the version of yourself that your world refuses to let die. When too many things break at once, the mind begins to associate the environment with the failure. Even neutral spaces become emotionally stained. Even harmless objects become symbols. This is not poetic exaggeration, this is how the brain is wired. The brain attaches emotional weight to physical places, and when those emotions are heavy, the geography becomes unbearable. That's when escape becomes logical, not impulsive. The desire to leave becomes a desperate attempt to break the connection between where you are and what you have suffered. You want new streets, not because the old ones are ugly, but because the old ones have seen too much of your pain. Psychologists call this the context memory link, and it's powerful. Once a place becomes soaked in memory, it becomes difficult to breathe in it without feeling the past pressing on your chest. That's why so many people pack their bags after heartbreak, or why a job loss makes someone want to move cities, or why grief makes someone crave a distant place where no one knows their history. The instinct is almost universal. If I go far enough, my past will stop chasing me. And while the past always finds a way to follow, changing environments does something profound. It interrupts the loop long enough for the mind to reorganize itself. But the desire to leave isn't only born from brokenness. There is another version, subtler, quieter, often more terrifying. It happens when the life you're living is stable, almost comfortable, but feels too small for your soul. The routine works, the people around you care, nothing dramatic has exploded. And yet, something inside you is starving. Starving for novelty, starving for expansion, starving for something you cannot name but can feel in your bones. It's a hunger that doesn't look like suffering from the outside, but it burns from the inside, like a slow fever. This is the escape impulse that comes from growth, not pain. It's the moment when you realize that your surroundings have stopped challenging you. Everything is predictable. Every week looks like the last. Every conversation sounds like an echo. You begin to feel like you're living on autoplay, functioning, performing, existing, but not expanding. You can feel your life becoming narrower, your world shrinking even as you move through it. This is the kind of stagnation that kills without making noise. It's not sadness, it's the absence of aliveness. It's the sense that you have a bigger self waiting somewhere, but it cannot grow in the soil you're standing in now. Sometimes the desire to leave arises from a moment of clarity, like someone briefly turning on a light in a dark room. And sometimes it comes from exhaustion, like your soul is tired of pretending to fit into a life that was never meant for its size. Humans are experts at adapting, but adaptation can become a trap when it forces you into shapes too small for your truth. You shrink to avoid conflict. You adjust to not disappoint others. You fit yourself into identities that no longer feel like yours. You become polite inside your own life. And then one day, the desire to leave hits you like a wave. Not because you want to abandon everything, but because you want to stop abandoning yourself. And here's the part that most people never acknowledge. There are two kinds of escape. One comes from fear, the other comes from growth. The first version whispers, "I can't handle this anymore." The second version whispers, "I'm meant for something more." Both whispers sound similar, both feel like running, but they come from different depths within you. The escape driven by fear is the urge to stop drowning. The escape driven by growth is the urge to start breathing. Yet society is uncomfortable with both. The moment you talk about leaving your job, your city, your relationship, your identity, people panic, not because they care about your well-being, but because your desire for change threatens the stability they're clinging to. People project their fear onto you. They tell you to stay practical, stay realistic, stay where you are. But what they really mean is, don't do what I was too afraid to do. Society values stability because stability keeps the system functioning. But individuals don't thrive on stability. They thrive on meaning, movement, and identity renewal. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. Humans are not designed to stay in the same narrative forever. And the desire to leave is often the first sign that you're ready for another chapter, a chapter the people around you may not understand because it threatens the version of you they rely on. This is why escape isn't always a sign of weakness. Sometimes staying is the real act of fear. Staying because it's familiar. Staying because you don't want others to judge you. Staying because the cage is comfortable, even if it's killing you slowly. Leaving takes courage. Leaving means you're willing to walk into a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. Leaving means you're willing to disappoint the expectations others wrote for you. Leaving means you're choosing truth over image, growth over comfort. And maybe that's why the desire to leave everything behind feels so strong for so many people. Not because they hate their lives, but because they're finally brave enough to admit that their life doesn't match their soul. There is something profoundly human in the belief that if we change our location, we will somehow change ourselves. People mock it, wherever you go, you take yourself with you, as if that ends the conversation. But it doesn't. It only scratches the surface, because while it's true that you cannot outrun your mind, people forget that environments shape minds in ways that are invisible, silent, and constant. A place can either compress you or expand you. It can drain you or awaken you. It can keep you replaying old versions of yourself, or it can offer you the space to rewrite who you're becoming. Humans don't transform in a vacuum. We transform in context, and sometimes the context you're in is killing you more quietly than any tragedy ever could. There is a concept in psychology called narrative freedom. It means that the story you tell about yourself is heavily influenced by the stories others tell about you. When you live in the same place for long enough, surrounded by the same people, their perception becomes a mirror that traps you. You become that person defined by old mistakes, old roles, old labels. The shy one, the angry one, the quiet one, the emotional one, the funny one, the one who dropped out, the one who struggled, the one who always helps, the one who never says no. People lock you into patterns even after you've outgrown them. And you don't notice it happening because it happens slowly, subtly, over years. You start playing the role others expect because it's easier than fighting their memory of you. That is the invisible suffocation of familiarity, not the routine itself, but the identity that routine refuses to let evolve. And this is why when someone leaves their hometown, they often become almost unrecognizable, not because they changed drastically, but because they were finally allowed to become what they always were beneath the weight of familiarity. Their personality expands, their confidence rises, their voice strengthens, their presence sharpens. Leaving is not a magic trick. Leaving is simply the removal of the pressure that kept them small. But the world romanticizes roots. Stay, belong, be loyal to your soil. These ideas are comforting, poetic, and sometimes even true, but they are not universal. Not everyone is meant to bloom in the same environment that planted them. Some plants outgrow their pots. Some trees break their own containers. Some people aren't meant to be local stories, but global ones. And the danger of staying too long in one place is that you start confusing comfort with purpose, safety with meaning, familiarity with destiny. Seneca wrote that travel cures nothing because the mind travels with you. But Seneca lived in a world without overstimulation, without modern anxiety, without the relentless demands of urban noise, digital connection, and social comparison. He never lived in a world where your entire life could be compressed into metrics, timelines, and expectations. His mind didn't carry the weight our minds carry. Today, leaving isn't just escape, it can be recalibration, reset, mental defragmentation. Sometimes your mind doesn't need therapy. It needs distance. It needs new air. It needs a place that doesn't remind it of who to be. Neuroscience now proves what ancient humans instinctively knew. The brain responds to novelty with increased dopamine baseline, meaning new environments literally increase your capacity to feel possibility. Movement activates learning. Exploration activates creativity. The unfamiliar expands cognitive flexibility. This isn't philosophy, it's biology. Your brain comes back online when your world changes. And that's why leaving feels like waking up from a long sleep. But beyond science, there is something spiritual in the act of leaving. Something that ancient philosophers tried to explain through metaphors and modern thinkers try to explain through psychology. Sartre said we are condemned to be free, meaning the burden of choosing our own existence is both terrifying and liberating. Simone de Beauvoir said that life acquires meaning only when we choose it ourselves, meaning you cannot truly live inside a script written by someone else. And yet, most people live exactly like that, following a path laid out by culture, family, expectation, convenience. Not because they're weak, but because they never stop to question it. This is why leaving can feel like the first honest decision in your entire life. It is not a rejection of the world. It is a reclaiming of your own authorship. It is your soul saying, I am ready to write the next chapter myself. Not the chapter others want, not the chapter circumstances dictated, but the chapter you choose.
And here lies a truth most people will never admit. Sometimes staying is the real act of cowardice. Staying where you are tolerated but not understood. Staying where you are convenient but not valued. Staying because it's easier than explaining why you want more. Staying because people around you fear your evolution. Staying because the cage is familiar and familiarity feels safer than freedom. Leaving, on the other hand, is terrifying. It requires dismantling the identity you built. It requires walking into uncertainty. It requires admitting that the life you have is no longer the life you want. It requires disappointing the version of you that others rely on. It requires witnessing your old world shrink behind you while the new world has not yet formed. But it is precisely this fear that makes leaving meaningful. You do not evolve by certainty. You evolve by courage. And then there is the deeper layer, the one that exists beneath psychology, beneath philosophy, beneath narrative. Humans are born with nomadic souls. It's not metaphor, it's ancestral memory. For most of human history, staying in one spot was dangerous, movement was survival, exploration was instinct, stillness was death. We carry this memory inside our biology. It's why the horizon pulls us. It's why the unknown magnetizes us. It's why every child fantasizes about running away, discovering the world, crossing boundaries. These fantasies aren't childish. They are echoes of a species that was never meant to remain confined. So when the desire to leave appears, it is not madness, it is not failure, it is not immaturity, it is the most ancient part of you resurfacing. The part of you that knows life is bigger than the routines that claim you. The part of you that knows identity grows best in unfamiliar soil. The part of you that remembers that movement is the birthplace of transformation. You can silence it, you can deny it. You can remain where you are and pretend you're fine. But that desire will return, because that desire is truth, and truth always resurfaces. There's a moment in almost every journey, internal or external, where the desire to leave transforms into something else. Something deeper, something no longer rooted in escape, but in clarity. It's the point where you realize that leaving isn't an abandonment of life, it's an act of returning to it. And no story illustrates this more vividly than the experience of Henry David Thoreau. People often reduce Thoreau to the man who went into the woods, the man who built a little cabin by Walden Pond, the man who lived simply. But that interpretation is shallow. Thoreau wasn't chasing simplicity, he was chasing essence. He wasn't escaping society, he was escaping anesthetization, the slow death that comes from living a life so surrounded by noise that you can't hear yourself think. Thoreau didn't leave because he hated people, he left because he hated the haze that modern life creates, the haze of busyness, the haze of obligations, the haze of being continuously watched, judged, categorized, and spoken about. He believed that society forces us into roles we never consciously accepted: worker, neighbor, friend, provider, achiever, responsible adult, expected version of ourselves. And under all that pressure, the real self gets buried, not killed, buried, lost under layers of expectations that are whispered into us over years. Thoreau's cabin wasn't an escape from the world, it was a surgery on himself, a deliberate removal of everything that wasn't authentically him so that what remained could be confronted directly. Modern psychology has a term for what he did: social sensory deprivation. Removing the constant stimulation of society so the brain can reorganize itself without external interference. Today, we know that long periods of silence, real silence, not the false quiet of scrolling on a phone, change the brain. They increase neural plasticity, they enhance memory, they deepen focus, they sharpen perception. Silence isn't emptiness, silence is data, silence is information, silence is the doorway into whatever part of yourself that has been waiting to speak. Most people fear silence not because they dislike quiet, but because silence removes distractions, and when distractions disappear, truth appears. The truth about who you are, the truth about what you want, the truth about what you've been avoiding. Silence forces you to confront yourself without the noise of other people's opinions, and that confrontation can be violent. This is why many people avoid solitude, not because they're social, but because they're afraid of what they might hear inside their own mind. Thoreau understood this long before psychology gave it a name. He realized that a life lived in the constant shadow of noise becomes a life of quiet desperation, a life where you're breathing but not alive, present but not present, moving but not progressing, connected to everyone but disconnected from yourself. His decision to leave wasn't an act of rebellion, it was an act of clarity. It was his way of saying, I refuse to live a life I didn't choose. And that sentiment, that refusal, is the core of every human urge to leave everything behind. But the most important part of Thoreau's story isn't that he left, it's that he returned. He didn't stay in the woods forever, because the point of leaving wasn't to disappear permanently, it was to see clearly, to reset, to realign, to strip away the layers until the core of his identity became visible again. And once he found himself, he returned to society with a sharper mind, a stronger sense of self, and a clarity that nearly no one around him possessed. People mistake solitude for isolation. They forget that sometimes leaving is not a rejection of the world, it's a preparation for re-entering it as someone new. And that's the truth most people ignore. Leaving isn't always about escape. Leaving isn't always about pain. Leaving isn't always about running away. Sometimes, leaving is about becoming. Becoming the version of yourself that your environment doesn't allow you to be. Becoming the person your past cannot imagine. Becoming the self you've only met in brief glimpses, in the shower, in the dark, in the moments when life goes quiet enough for truth to surface. The world tells you to stay. Stay where you were born. Stay where you're known. Stay in the version of yourself that others are comfortable with. But the world does not have to live with your inner truth. You do. Only you know the weight of your unsaid dreams. Only you know the shape of the life you're trying to grow into. Only you know how small your current existence feels compared to the size of your soul. Sometimes the soil is wrong. Sometimes the air is wrong. Sometimes the past is too loud. Sometimes your name is trapped in the expectations of others. Sometimes your environment has no space for your evolution. And in those moments, leaving is not betrayal. Leaving is alignment. The desire to disappear for a while, to erase your presence, to rewrite your story, to put distance between you and your past, isn't failure, it's lucidity. It's the recognition that life is too large to live in one emotional neighborhood forever. It's the recognition that human beings were never meant to be static creatures. It's the recognition that you are more than the sum of your habits, more than the memory of your hometown, more than the roles people assigned you. Maybe none of us were designed to stay rooted in the same place, the same identity, the same loop. Maybe the urge to leave is the confirmation that we are still alive, still capable of transformation, still capable of hearing the faint voice inside us that says, "There is more. You are more. Go see." And maybe, just maybe, the truest version of yourself is waiting somewhere you haven't reached yet. Waiting in a new street, a new room, a new silence, a new horizon. Waiting for the day you finally gather the courage to walk away from every fool you've outgrown and step into the life that has been calling your name for years. Sometimes leaving is not the end of the story. Sometimes it's the beginning of the only story that was ever meant to be yours.